When I first started this podcast, I released 6 episodes covering the trial of Letecia Stauch. The original 6 episodes were just the audio from the videos that I did for my YouTube channel, recapping what was happening in court with the witnesses. But I have always felt like the story of 11-year-old Gannon Stauch and the circus that Letecia created through her antics needed to be told in a more comprehensive way. I've spent the last couple of months going back over all of my notes, rewatching the trial, suffering through the FBI calls again, and trying to decipher what was being said in those insanity evaluations with Dr. Dorothy Lewis. There are things that I picked up on this time that I didn't remember from the first time. And there are more things that I found as I did some extra research and went down a few rabbit holes. But rather than releasing a second series of the Letecia Stauch trial, I have updated the previously released episodes, Season 1, Episodes 1 through 6, though the original versions are still available on my YouTube channel. But 6 episodes wasn't enough to dive in the way that I really wanted to. We needed one more to complete this story. So this is that episode. If you haven't listened to the updated versions, I recommend stopping here and going back to episode 1 before starting this one so that you get the full story. If you've made it through those and you're here to find out how the story ends, buckle up. My name is Brandy Churchwell, and this is 13th Juror Podcast, where we unravel complex court cases and present them as compelling stories, breaking down the details and weighing the evidence from a non-legal perspective, just like the jurors do. Today, we are continuing on the tragic story of the murder of 11-year-old Gannon Stauch and the trial of his stepmother, Letecia Stauch. Part 7, The Defense. After calling 59 witnesses to the stand, the state of Colorado rests their case against Letecia Stauch. Now it's time for the defense to present their case, and they will only call 2 witnesses. The first is Dr. Rhonda Niederhauser, a clinical psychologist who met with Letecia in December of 2019, the month before Gannon went missing. There wasn't much to this testimony. Basically, Letecia had gone in to see her primary care physician because of issues with sleep and constipation. Her doctor had Dr. Niederhauser speak to Letecia for about half an hour. Letecia said that she had a lot of anxiety, and most of it was coming from her job at the school. There was a situation at work where Letecia said that someone was being harassed, so she stood up for that person, and now she felt like she was being harassed. Dr. Niederhauser diagnosed Letecia with generalized anxiety. She recommended that she see a therapist, and she suggested an antihistamine medication that helps with anxiety and sleep. Other than anxiety and issues with sleeping, there were no other problems, no delusions, no memory issues. Letecia told her that she had anxiety in the past, but nothing else, and had never had any kind of inpatient treatment or seen a therapist, and she never mentioned any abuse. Now, they set up a follow-up appointment for 2 weeks later, and at that appointment, Letecia said that things were a lot better. But Letecia had decided to leave the job that she didn't like, and they wouldn't let her out of her contract without a doctor's note saying that it was recommended that she leave because of her anxiety. So, Dr. Niederhauser wrote her the note to get her out of the contract with the school, and she said she never saw Letecia again. Interestingly, Letecia would later reference this note in a letter to the judge about a year after her arrest, claiming that the school allowed her to medically resign due to the ongoing reality breaks she was experiencing. She just kind of creates her own reality when she tells people things. The other witness for the defense was Dr. Dorothy Lewis, an expert in serial killers and dissociative identity disorder, or DID, also previously known as multiple personalities. Now, I mentioned some of Dr. Lewis's credentials in the previous episode. She's a high-profile doctor, a professor of psychiatry at Yale and NYU, the author of the book Guilty by Reason of Insanity, and expert witness in the trials of John Lennon's assassin, the Washington Beltway sniper, and multiple serial killers, including Joel Rifkin and Ted Bundy. She's also the subject of an HBO documentary titled Crazy, Not Insane. So Dr. Lewis is Kind of like the star witness for Letecia, her entire defense rests on whether or not the jury buys into the doctor's opinion. The defense attorney, Tellini, went through 35 minutes of Dr. Lewis's background and experience, but spent only 70 minutes actually questioning Dr. Lewis. I think maybe they were hoping that the jury would be so impressed with her experience that they would give more weight to her testimony. But the cross-examination of Dr. Lewis by the prosecution would take 70 minutes on the first day, plus one more entire day on the stand. But before we get to that, because there's a lot involved there, let's take a look at direct examination. Now, Dr. Lewis says that Letecia came from a very violent home, and DID is often related to childhood abuse. She also says that Letecia had possible traumatic brain injuries. For example, she said she had a bookshelf fall on her head and she lost consciousness for 15 minutes, which is a story we heard in a different context and a different version earlier in this trial. But she also says that there was a softball injury. Now, for these reasons, Dr. Lewis said that she wanted an EEG and an MRI done on Letecia to corroborate that she had some kind of neurological dysfunction that can cause her to be in an altered state. She wasn't able to get the EEG and MRI done, and more on that in a minute, but she said that even without that, her conclusion was that Letecia was insane.
She was psychotic at the time. She was not in touch with reality, and she did not, I don't think she knew the difference between right and wrong. I don't know whether she even knew what she was doing.
Dr. Lewis thinks that Letecia suffers from DID because of some of the things that she said that she observed during her interviews with her. For example, this.
When I was interviewing her over a period of time, suddenly it seemed to me that she was speaking Russian. I don't speak Russian, and it only had that lilt to it. I didn't have words that sounded Russian, but it looked as though she had switched into a different entity. I think she believed she was speaking some other language, but I don't know what that was.
She also made this observation of Letecia.
What puzzled me was, this is not a stupid girl. She is intelligent. She is able to reason, apparently logically, and to speak clearly and coherently. And yet she makes up the darndest stories that no ordinary person of below average intelligence would expect to be believed.
So the doctor gives the opinion that the defense wanted to hear. She believes that Letecia is insane, and she knows that she makes up crazy stories, but she also has multiple personalities, so it isn't expected that we should think about that logically. Simple enough, right? Now it's time for cross-examination, and the district attorney, Michael Allen, was more than ready to tear down this diagnosis. Let's start with the doctor saying that she wanted the EEG and MRI to corroborate that Letecia had neurological dysfunction. Here's some of what Dr. Lewis said on the stand about that.
As it was my understanding that the court refused to finance the EEG and the MRI and the neuropsychological testing. I worked as hard as I could to get these. In fact, I called the neurologist for free to discuss the case because I could not get funding from this court to get these tests done. So I called and discussed it with him. I contacted the neuropsychologist with whom I've worked for 30 years and worked with her and spoke with her and got as much data as I possibly could. And I begged her attorneys to get this. And their answer was that the court would not pay for those tests to be done.
The DA asked Dr. Lewis about being scheduled to testify in October of 2022 about the need for these tests in order to get the funding.
On October 13th, 2022, you were scheduled to come testify to this court about why you wanted an EEG and MRI done, correct? You recall that?
No. But, say that again?
Do you not recall being asked to come testify with regards to why you needed an EEG done and an MRI done in this case?
I do not know what you are referring to. I have no idea what you're referring to, because I would have been pleased to at least talk on the phone to the judge or whatever. I begged to have these things done. I can only tell you that. And I would have spoken to anyone who wanted to talk to me about it.
Dr. Lewis says she doesn't remember anything about that. Mr. Allen asks if she knew that they didn't have that hearing because the defense withdrew their request for the EEG and MRI.
On October 13, 2022, the request to have an EEG done and MRI done by defense was withdrawn, and we did not go to hearing on that. Were you ever told that?
This is news to me right now, sir. That
sounds bad for the defense, right? But was this news to Dr. Lewis? The second day of Dr. Lewis's testimony, Mr. Allen brings up emails between the doctor and the defense attorneys, where Dr. Lewis says to drop the request for the testing.
And did you say in that email, go ahead and withdraw the EEG? We'll address it at a later time.
He asked Dr. Lewis why she blamed it on the attorneys the day before.
Why did you yesterday tell this jury that you never requested to withdraw the EEG, that the attorneys did it and never told you anything about it?
Because I did not request to withdraw it. I said you could kind of wait and do it, and I did not think that they hadn't.
Dr. Lewis says that she was saying to drop the request and they would discuss it at a later time. But he reads her own words back to her.
I have been reading more on Letecia, and I think we should drop the EEG request. What does that mean to you?
This exchange is uncomfortable to watch, but the prosecution has to bring it up because it becomes a recurring theme. Dr. Lewis said that she wanted the MRI and EEG done before giving her report or her diagnosis for Letecia. These tests can show neurological dysfunction, and the reason that's important is because if there's dysfunction, that corroborates the doctor's diagnosis. But if there isn't any issue that comes up in the testing, then there's no corroboration there. So Mr. Allen brings up the testing as a way to corroborate because in Dr. Lewis's book, she even says in her own words that it's easy to fake DID. So the DA suggests that by not having the testing done, you're kind of getting rid of some of the things that go against your diagnosis, which can actually benefit the defense's theory that they're presenting. So the email situation was rough, but things only got worse from here. Another big issue that came up during the course of Dr. Lewis's testimony was over some notes that were apparently lost. Now, there were a few times when Dr. Lewis would refer to notes that she used to make her diagnosis that she couldn't find, or things that she had in her notes but she doesn't know where they came from. For example, the doctor's second day on the stand, she said that she forgot someone else, other than Letecia, had said when Letecia was younger, she asked to be called Maria sometimes.
I noticed in some of my notes about Letecia that someone had said when she was younger, and I forgot this yesterday, when she was younger, she asked to be called Maria. And I had forgotten that yesterday.
Can you point me out where you found that information?
I'd have to look through all of this, but I can later if you like. I'll find it for you. It's just a note that I took because I thought it was interesting.
But what was it in an interview, or where did you get that note?
I, as I say, rather than take up the time of the court and look through all of this, I will find it for you. But I just noticed it in the past maybe several hours or so, and I can find it for you because...
Well, here's the deal. I only have an X amount of time to talk to you.
Right, yes.
And so I can't really let this linger around because it's pretty significant.
I think so, yes. Oh, dear.
So Dr. Lewis starts looking for this note in the stacks of papers that she has with her. Then suddenly she finds it in her notes, but it doesn't say who told her that. Mr. Allen points out that her diagnosis is being questioned because there's nothing to support or corroborate it. Then suddenly, poof, these notes appear the next day, but there's still no name on it, so it still can't be really corroborated. The whole thing is just messy. Also, any notes that are used in court have to be turned over to opposing counsel so that they can prepare a cross-examination for them. So this new little nugget of information is not something that's allowed in during testimony because it wasn't in her report or on anything that was turned over. After this little debacle with the magically appearing notes, the prosecutor plans on questioning Dr. Lewis about something that will be seen in the video clips that the jury will watch from the interviews with Letecia. So on the third day of interviews, Letecia shows up to meet the doctor and suddenly has this note that she hands over in another language. They look at it together. Now, the audio in the interviews between Letecia and Dr. Lewis is terrible. It is really hard to make out what they're saying, even when it's cleaned up. But I'm going to play a small part of this so that you can hear it. Letecia has just handed over this note to the doctor, who struggles to read it out loud. She begins by reading, I, Maria, confess, Then Letecia interrupts her to say, "It's not in English."
I, Maria, confess it's not English.
Then she struggles to read this apparent Latin confession.
Confesso bona para magna qui se alentente. Ante radit Letecia, se Gannon Maria, se vida sana in conversano, etc. Desunt.
Dr. Lewis asks Letecia what it means, and Letecia says that she doesn't know. Dr. Lewis asks, "Well, how did you know it was a confession?" And Letecia says that she recognized a word. So this exchange continues with Dr. Lewis asking Letecia if she took Latin in school, and then they go back and forth about this, and Letecia keeps saying that she doesn't know where this came from or what it means. They pick out a word that means defend, and they try to translate some other parts. Then the note ends with something that they translate to "rest in peace," and it's signed Maria.
Requiescat in pace, rest in peace. Gannon. Maria, a.k.a.
So the whole thing is pretty wild, right? But this Latin confession was apparently lost, never to be found again. There's also video footage of Letecia and her alleged alters signing a piece of paper where the doctor says that she signed each name and signed them differently. Now, that was never found either. So the prosecutor is planning on asking the doctor about some of these clips in front of the jury. But before the jury or Dr. Lewis is brought in, Mr. Allen asked the judge to verify with the doctor that she doesn't have any of this or any other notes, because he doesn't want another situation like the one that they had before where she just kind of pops up with them.
If the court recalls, I was asking for notes and documents that were used during a portion of the interview that we're watching now this afternoon that the doctor had. Namely, there was a so-called confession that was written in Latin. Mr. Cellini informed me that those documents were lost, that they don't know where they're at, and that the Latin confession was gibberish. I just want to, as a precaution, I don't want something to come out of Dr. Lewis's box regarding these notes for the first time while she's on the stand, because I'm under the impression they're gone. I'm going to ask her about it, but I can foresee her pulling notes out and saying they're right here.
So Dr. Lewis is brought in, and the judge confirms with her before the jury comes in that she doesn't have any of these notes.
Dr. Lewis, I just wanted to double check. You obtained from the defendant, as I understand it, I think it was a confession that was written in Latin. Is that accurate?
Your Honor, I have been looking for something written in Latin. I didn't receive it, but in my notes it says, "Get hold of a letter written in Latin."
Okay.
So somebody has it.
You may or may not have had it at some point in time.
No, I never had it.
You never had it.
I've seen it.
Okay.
I became aware of it very recently.
It's fair to say then that it is not in your possession now. It's not in the stack of notes and things that you have now. All right.
Then, when the doctor is on the stand, Mr. Allen is questioning her about these notes, asking where they are, and as luck would have it, she happens to find one of those notes that she just confirmed that she didn't have.
So you handed her a piece of paper and asked her to sign her name.
Yeah.
What happened to that piece of paper?
Thought that I had anything that I will certainly find it for you.
Oh, wait a minute here. You just told the court that you don't have these documents, that you lost them. That's what you just...
There's trouble. This is probably it.
Your Honor,
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to have you step out in the hallway.
The jury is excused for a moment, and the judge addresses this with the attorneys.
Your Honor, I hate to say I predicted this, but this is exactly what I predicted was going to happen. That somehow she pulls these documents out when confronted on them. And that's why I wanted to get on the record that she lost them. And the record should reflect that the witness is now giving Mr. Cellini a series of documents that she has on her lap.
After this, they have to take a recess while the attorneys go through her big stack of notes and papers to figure out what they have and what they don't. The whole thing was like nothing I've seen in a trial before. And if the disappearing and reappearing notes and the MRI emails aren't bad enough, there's also an issue with Dr. Lewis having multiple other people in the interview room with her when she's talking to Letecia. including Leticia's attorney. There's one point in the interview where it seems like Mr. Tellini is bringing up the idea that Letecia or Maria or whoever it was really trying to kill Leticia's stepfather, James, not Gannon. Now, Mr. Allen asked Dr. Lewis if she thinks that it was a bad idea to have him in there for a forensic interview like this.
Now, do you still think, having watched this video, that it was a good idea to have Mr. Tellini in there with you?
Yeah.
You think it's appropriate for Mr. Tellini to plant the seed with the defendant that it was James that she actually shot?
I don't think that she planted any seeds. I don't think that she came up with that.
Mr. Tellini addressed this on his redirect.
If I was trying to feed her a story, it wouldn't make any sense for me to do it in that setting where it's recorded, would it?
But Leticia's attorney isn't the only one who Dr. Lewis had in there. Mr. Allen plays a clip of the video where you can see someone else walking out of the room, and he asks the doctor who it is. But Dr. Lewis says she doesn't recognize him.
Well, freeze it. Who's that person right there?
I don't recognize him.
That's not your son? You don't recognize your own son?
Dr. Lewis said that she had her son in there to operate the camera. But Mr. Allen points out the issue with that.
Because he was running the camera, but I don't recognize him.
Well, running the camera, Dr. Lewis, he's going out the door when the camera shuts off. What is your son doing in the interview room?
So there were obviously some issues, to say the least. But let's take a look at the rest of Dr. Lewis's testimony, including some of the clips that the jury watched from the 14 hours of interviews that she did with Letecia over the course of those 3 days in November of 2022. Now, I mentioned that DID is controversial, and Dr. Lewis is asked about this on the stand. The controversy really comes from whether people believe that DID exists or not. It's becoming more understood and accepted with better documentation as time goes on, but Dr. Lewis explains that it isn't something that she believed in at first. She tells the story of the first time that she says that she witnessed someone with DID. She was interviewing a woman named Marie, who she was told had an alter named Billy. She was getting ready to leave, and Marie said a few times, "Don't go." She had something that she needed to say. Finally, the doctor says she gets up to leave, and this happens.
I got up and stood up, walked toward the door, put my hand on the doorknob, and opened the door. And behind me, a voice said, "Don't go." And it was chilling. And I turned around, and instead of this kind of wimpy-looking girl with glasses looking at me, she had changed, and she was sitting with her legs towards the door, her hands on her knees, and, in a masculine kind of look. And she said, "Don't go. There's something I have to tell you." And she put out her hand, and I put out mine, and I took hers, and I said, "Billy?" And she said, "Yes."
Interesting moment in the courtroom as she's describing this. But she says that was something that she had never seen before, and it scared her. But now she credits this as being her very first experience witnessing DID. Since then, she has studied it in depth and has come to be considered an expert in the field. Now, Mr. Allen points out that Dr. Torres asked Letecia about being able to change to Maria and said that it wasn't possible for her to just change identities like that. So he asks the doctor why it's possible now.
Why is it that Dr. Torres can ask her, "Can I speak to Maria Sanchez?" Can't change. She says, "I'm not able to change that persona." But when you ask if she's able to change.
Magic.
Magic. Got it. Here are a few of the highlights from the interviews. We were introduced to some new personalities, like Jasmine, a princess who had been to Dubai. Now, where have we heard of a princess named Jasmine before? And Letecia says that there are issues that she's had before where she just wakes up on an airplane, not knowing what's happening. One time she says that she went to Australia with Harley. Apparently she was doing a lot of crazy stuff and then just kind of woke up and realized that Harley was by herself. Now, Harley doesn't corroborate this, and neither does Letecia's passport. But she also talks about a jail call where she says that Maria had taken over and she called a friend of Letecia's and was speaking Russian. Although jail calls are monitored, and that also doesn't exist to corroborate her story. In one clip of these interviews, Letecia is telling the doctor that it doesn't make sense for her to hurt a child and throw her entire life away. She said she wouldn't do that. She's the one who took care of Gannon. She says that she was planning on leaving. She was going to go back to the East Coast, and Gannon knew that and wanted to go with her. If only she had done that, he would have been saved. Once again, Letecia is trying to make herself the victim and the hero, but never the bad guy. Something else that's interesting here is Dr. Lewis turns around and asks Letecia's attorney about Letecia having memory recall. Now, she does this in front of Letecia as if she's not sitting literally right there. She also asks a ton of leading questions. Now, this becomes a big point during cross-examination because Mr. Allen points out that this is basically feeding Letecia what to say. Now, during the course of the interviews, Dr. Lewis uses her magic and somehow gets Letecia's alters to show up, including Maria, so that she can talk to her. Now, Maria is the one that we've been wanting to hear from because this is the one who is supposedly responsible for Gannon's death. Now, the audio in these interviews is terrible, unfortunately, but I have tried to get a few clips and clean it up as much as possible so that you can get an idea of what is being said and, more importantly, how it is being said. Now, the first time that one of these alters shows up, she tells Dr. Lewis that she's not a violent person. She doesn't understand why people keep asking her what's going on. She says it's her job to protect people. For example, if people are hurting kids or the elderly, she's going to show up to protect them. It's what she does. Listen to the following exchange. Now, some of the parts that are the most difficult to understand are trimmed out.
I'm not a violent person. If someone is trying to hurt people, I'm going to make sure they're okay. Because that is what I do each and every time. I'm going to always make sure that people are going to be okay. Understand why I'm always being asked what is going on in here. Because this is my job to do things for people and to protect them. And I'm going to always do that because if people are molesting kids and people are hurting kids, this is what I do for them. And if people are hurting elderly people and people are always doing this to people, this is what I'm going to do.
Now, we've heard before that Maria is the protector. So even though she didn't pop up and say, hey, y'all, it's Maria Sanchez, the Mexican woman who was trained in Russia as a sniper to kill people, she's fitting the description of Maria the protector. Then there's a moment where the protector addresses Dr. Lewis, ironically in the exact way that Letecia consistently addressed Al in those FBI calls. She tells her if people are inside your home or inside her home, she's going to protect them.
And when people are inside your home or inside my home, I'm going to protect them. Do you understand that?
The whole do you not understand thing sounds exactly like the FBI calls. Now, shortly after this, there's a break in talking and Letecia/Maria gets quiet. She rolls her neck and her head around a little bit and then kind of shows back up as another alter. And Dr. Lewis asks her if she knows where she is or what just happened. Dr. Lewis asks who she's talking to and she's told Taylor.
Well, I talked. Taylor.
Letecia has described Taylor as the successful and happy alter, the one who is everything that Letecia wishes she could be. And she's married to a guy named Tyler, and they have 3 children. So the doctor asks if she knows what just happened, since Taylor just kind of showed up during a conversation with the protector. And she says, yes, ma'am, you asked me about my grandpa.
Taylor, do you know what just happened? Yes, ma'am. What just happened? You asked me about my grandpa.
Dr. Lewis tells Taylor that she just talked to someone who kept saying, I protect them, and asked Taylor if she knows who that was. Taylor apologizes. She's so embarrassed she doesn't know what Dr. Lewis means. She doesn't understand what just happened. Dr. Lewis asked who is the protector, and Taylor is able to answer her. Her protector is Maria.
Who would be the protector? Oh, my protector is Maria.
So the doctor says, Maria, I would like very much to talk to you. Taylor says you'd have to ask Maria. Sometimes she'll talk, sometimes she won't.
Maria, I don't like very much to talk with you. If you want to talk to Maria in the house, sometimes she'll talk, sometimes she won't.
While she's got Taylor there, the doctor asks her some questions about what she likes to do. Here, you can hear Taylor giving her hobbies, like hanging out, drinking wine, being by the beach, and hanging with her husband, Tyler.
I like to go and hang out and drink some wine and be by the beach and go with Tyler.
So Dr. Lewis asked Taylor to go do those things so that she can talk to Maria. She says, Maria, I know you can hear me, and I need to talk to you. Letecia writes a note to the doctor while they're sitting there that says Maria will come on her own terms. Now, she also writes a note saying sometimes she doesn't let you talk to me, though the doctor says she isn't sure who she was referring to. Now, Letecia or Taylor or whoever she's claiming to be in this moment begins to tell the story of what she says happened. It had something to do with Gannon wanting YouTube followers, so he was doing some kind of challenge. Of course, again, blame is being shifted to her victim. So Letecia thought that he was missing. She reported him missing, and then she skips forward in the story, saying that she tried to bring him back to life, but he didn't come back to life. She said, you don't understand what that sight was like, that Gannon was never supposed to die. Now here you can hear Letecia say that she's not a monster. She's bothered that people think that she's some kind of mass murderer that killed someone. But she said she didn't know it was Gannon. Under no circumstances did she think it was Gannon.
I'm not a monster. Tired of people thinking that I'm just a mass murderer that just killed someone. I didn't know that was Gannon. Okay? No circumstances. You can just Gannon.
She says you don't know what it's like to be in her life when she realized it was Gannon. She never knew it was him. Then Letecia starts rubbing her face and her eyes. Her head moves around a bit. And then suddenly, her voice changes.
Someone was in the home. We don't understand. Someone was in the home. Right?
I know it's hard to understand the audio, but you can hear a sudden accent come out, repeating constantly that somebody was in the home and she just had to protect them. Now keep in mind, Maria is the personality that is supposed to be the protector, and this is the personality that Letecia said is responsible for Gannon's murder. Maria Sanchez, the Spanish or Mexican woman who was trained as an assassin in Russia. Now, the first time she showed up, there was no accent. She just kept repeating that she was the protector, and she didn't understand why that's a problem. But now, Maria Sanchez is back, and this time she's speaking in this accent. Not sure if it's Spanish or Russian or a mix of the two. Maybe Spussian with a South Carolina twang. It's unclear. But Dr. Lewis asks her, where'd you get that accent? And she responds, I always talk like this.
This is how I talk. This is the old gift.
The doctor also asks her to sign her name, so she hands her a piece of paper and she signs Maria Sanchez. The doctor says, nice to meet you, Maria, and reaches out her hand to shake it. Letecia/Maria looks at her and fist bumps her. She also asks Maria if she knows the other people in the room and asks if she's willing to meet them. Now, her accent comes in and out, but I wanted to piece some clips together to highlight the basic story of what Maria Sanchez says happened. Now, remember, this is the first time that we're getting to talk to the person that Letecia says is responsible for Gannon's murder. This is what we've been waiting on. The audio has been cleaned up as much as possible, but it's still difficult to hear sometimes. Maria starts by saying that all she did was grab the gun, and she mentions a man in a cape. In this clip, she says that she saw someone that looked like they were in a cape, so she fired the gun. She says she had to protect the people that were in the house, because if someone was in the home, they were going to harm them. So that's all she did.
I saw someone who looked like they were in the cape and I fired them. That's what I did. Okay? All I did. You don't understand. I had to protect the people that were in the house. Okay? Because if someone was in the home, they were going to rape someone, they were going to molest them, they were going to kill them. I had to protect them. All I did. Okay?
She then explains she fired the gun because she's trained to do that. The doctor asked her, trained to do what? And she says, trained to kill. It's what she does. She does it for a living.
And I fired the gun. I did not know, didn't have a safety. I didn't know any of that, but that's what I do. I'm trained to do that. Okay? I'm trained to kill. Okay? I'm trained to kill. That's what I do. Trained to kill. Okay? That's what I do. Kill for a living. Okay? Anyone that tries to hurt them, I'm trained to kill. That hurts the people that I care about. Okay? And that's what I did.
So she is trained to kill to protect the people she cares about. So she took the gun and fired it at someone. In this next clip, she says they had a cape on. They look like a dangerous man.
I took the gun, I fired the gun at someone. They had a cape on, they look like a dangerous man.
I fired at dangerous man, okay? It's what I do.
Fired at a dangerous man, okay? That's what I do. I will protect the people that I love. I always do that, okay? I don't understand that wrong.
The doctor asked what she did when she realized it was Gannon, but she said that she didn't realize anything. She left immediately. She said she did what she was supposed to do. She killed the threat.
So what did you think you done? Did what I was supposed to do, which I killed the threat. The threat was there for Letecia and family and for the Sarahs.
She says Leticia's family was missing, so she had to protect them. Her son was missing, and she protects them. That's what she does. She said that she was upset. Everyone was upset. The little baby girl was upset, referring to Lena. Everyone was crying, so that's what she does.
Because Letecia, my family, they were missing, and I had to protect them. Letecia's son was missing. To protect them, that's what I do. She was upset. Everyone was upset. Little baby girl was upset. Everyone was crying. That's what I do.
Dr. Lewis continues to talk to Maria for a while, and we hear that Maria is only 28 years old. And Letecia is 39, but somehow Maria has been protecting Letecia since Letecia was 16. Not sure how that math is mathing, but that's what she says. I think she also says something about not liking cats. It's all very odd, but we finally have Maria there to ask all these questions. And what does Dr. Lewis do? Tells her, Maria, the trained assassin, that she's had a hard day and they can wrap things up for the day. She should go rest. Now, Mr. Allen asked Dr. Lewis why she spent so much time trying to get Maria to come out and then ended the interview. Dr. Lewis said that although she looked different and sounded different, there were times that she saw change, but it wasn't always Maria. She said it wasn't consistent. Which, I mean, look, we already knew that. We know Leticia's not consistent, but that's not personality change. That's Letecia not being able to keep up with her story. We aren't new to this behavior. Regardless, it's also interesting that Maria Sanchez is saying that she killed Gannon by shooting him. But that's not how Gannon died. The gunshot wound isn't the only thing that happened. There were all those stab wounds and head trauma as well. It wasn't just one gunshot wound. Now, the following day, the supposed Latin confession is handed over at the start of the interview with Dr. Lewis, and they discuss that for a while. There are also some other strange things that happen, like Letecia, in whatever form, mentioning flashbacks of blood and talking about a red and black cape. Now, there's something that's said about always getting in trouble, and I think there's a new personality that shows up at some point. But after a while, Dr. Lewis asked to speak to Maria again. And even though nobody has met or seen or even heard of Maria for 39 years now, here on day 2 of the interview, Dr. Lewis is able to get Maria, the assassin who is from Mexico but speaks Russian and writes in Latin, to come out again for the second time in 2 days. Maria says that since Gannon's murder, she's been busy, doing her job, taking care of other people, mostly getting rid of them. She's asked if she has ever killed anyone, and she says that she killed someone in Mexico who was hurting Letecia. She's been her defender for a really long time. Now, the doctor asks her if she can see that it was Gannon who stood up and put a blanket around him. And she said, it's a possibility, but to her, it was just a man in a cape. Maria talks again about having special training, and when the doctor asks who she was in a past life, she says, I already told you. I can't tell you about my family. Dr. Lewis begins trying to question Maria about taking Gannon's body to Florida. She asks if Maria can put her in touch with someone who can tell her why they did that. And Maria says it's because they have to protect Letecia first. The doctor asks how she feels about talking with her. And Maria says, I don't know. Are you a threat? But with the accent, she pronounces it tret, and the doctor can't understand her. She even asks if she's saying dirt, but she finally realizes what she says.
I think that talking with me.
Are you a doctor?
Am I what?
Are you a doctor?
Oh, what?
A director?
Dirt. So,
Correct.
the threat.
And you're a director.
It's
The doctor says that she does her best to help Letecia. Now, there are some other conversations that happen during this interview. Still with the accent that is ever-changing and often fading, Maria tells the doctor that Letecia doesn't like drugs because her stepfather, James, used to sell her for drugs when she was a teenager. They also discuss Gannon being hit on the head with a board, and Letecia acts this out, which is startling to see. But when she's asked if she possibly mistook Gannon for someone else, she says it was James, her stepfather, that was hit on the head with the board. She says that James wore a lot of capes because he thought that he was a superhero. Okay, while they're talking about this, Letecia does this really creepy, really weird laugh.
No, she just said me. But he did not want anymore. It's a really yeah.
Maria says that Harley didn't know that Gannon was in the back of the van. And when the doctor starts talking about Letecia putting Gannon in the back of the van and driving to Florida, Maria gets upset. She says that she already told her. Letecia didn't do that. She had someone else do it.
And she did not do that. I already told you I had someone else to do that.
Maria repeats a few times, I already told you that. This sounds so much like Letecia on the FBI calls with Al. But she says that someone else did that. It wasn't Letecia. She says Letecia never had the body and she never took the body to Florida.
Yes, she never had the body. She never. She did not take the body to Florida. Who took the body? Sorry, you just asked me this question.
Then, suddenly, Maria is an expert at what evidence there is against Letecia, because she tells Dr. Lewis there's no evidence about that. Dr. Lewis then turns to the attorneys and asks about the evidence, and Maria interrupts her to answer.
There was no evidence of her having a wife there.
wasn't there evidence. The suitcase wasn't a big.
That's not evidence of her having a wife from a missing time.
When the attorney answers about the evidence that does exist about the body being in the van, Maria argues with the attorney.
Came from the body according to Harlan was in the van.
No, that's the thing.
That's what Harley says.
Well, I don't know what.
Maria is feisty. But it's interesting that she knows the evidence, since she said that she left when she shot Gannon and didn't even realize that it was Gannon. Now, the attorney, Josh Tellini, asks Maria, how did Gannon get all of those cuts on him? And Maria denies that there were any cuts. And again, Tellini argues back and forth with her.
How did Gannon get all my cuts on him?
I don't know why we
No, they cuts.
there was no evidence.
There were cuts.
I don't want any commands. I don't know the evidence.
They show her pictures from the evidence, and still, like a coward, she refuses to acknowledge what she did. Now, during the time that this is played in court, Letecia is laying face down on the defense table, hiding her face. I would too if I were her. Then she has the nerve to say that she's sorry that happened. Not to Gannon, but she's sorry what happened for Letecia, because when Letecia's upset, she's upset. Then, in typical Letecia mode, she begins to gaslight the doctor, the same way that she does everyone else.
You don't understand how serious that is. You think this is a joke? It's not a joke. Those are petty charges. Do you think this is a joke?
I guess then somehow we go back to it being someone else's fault, because she says, you can't tell on these people.
You cannot tell on these people. I don't think you guys are understanding how serious that is.
She says this isn't funny, it's not made up, and it's not a delusion.
So you don't understand. It's not funny. It's not made up. It's not a delusion. It's for real.
Maria says, you guys live in a perfect world. It's not a game. I don't play games. Games are stupid.
Saying that you guys live in a perfect world, and it's kind of big time. And live in a perfect world. It's not a game. You can play games. Games are stupid.
They try to get some more information from Maria, but Maria says that she will never give them answers. She says she cannot. The stabbing is something that has continuously been an issue because Letecia has denied it. I've always wondered if she held out on this part for so long because of the brutality of it, especially with the defensive wounds. It takes a lot to be able to stab a child 18 times, especially a child who's trying to defend himself. It's much more intimate than a gunshot wound or even the head trauma. It takes a long time, but eventually the stab wounds are brought up again toward the end, and Maria/Letecia is asked about a knife. She says it was a steak knife, and Dr. Lewis asks if it's a kitchen knife. She says yes. Letecia makes a stabbing motion, and it makes my stomach just drop. She was asked where the knife is, and she said she dropped it. The knife was never found, but they also didn't know that Gannon had been stabbed when this happened. Letecia said that he was screaming, screaming, screaming. She says that he was just laying there, and then she imitates his heavy breathing. She said she was trying to get him to breathe. The doctor said, "So you didn't mean for him to be dead?" And then her attorney asked, "Did you think it was James?" This is the moment where the prosecutor said that the attorney was trying to plant his theory, though the attorney denied that. The doctor turns and begins talking to the attorneys again as if Letecia isn't there. The clips took a long time to get through, and they were difficult to watch. But when Dr. Lewis is done, the state doesn't call Letecia to the stand. They also don't call Maria Sanchez or Victoria or Taylor or Harmony or Christina or Jasmine or Jasper or little Lucia. The defense rests. In closing arguments, the prosecutors argued that Letecia hated Gannon, and she murdered him, then made every effort to conceal it, which shows premeditation and judgment of a sane person who was trying to manipulate and control the investigation. She murdered Gannon, then she cleaned it up, put him in a suitcase, put boxes on top of that suitcase so that when police came, it would be hidden. And then she took the suitcase, put it in her car, left it at the airport until she had a chance to go get the suitcase and take it to the S-curve. She started coming up with stories to explain the evidence, like saying that Eduardo took a suitcase, just in case someone found the suitcase at the S-curve. Then she went back and got the suitcase, then drove it to Florida, hoping that it would never be found again when she threw it off that bridge. And she continued to try to manipulate everyone into thinking anything other than the truth, right up until the very end. The defense argued that Letecia had no motive to kill Gannon, and the brutality of the murder, they say, just showcases a psychotic break. The jury, made up of 7 men and 5 women, deliberated for nearly 8 hours before returning a verdict.
Count number 1, charge of murder in the first degree after deliberation. We, the jury, find the defendant Letecia Stauch guilty of count number 1, murder in the first degree after deliberation.
Guilty. Letecia is found guilty on all counts. Before she's sentenced, victim impact statements are given by multiple family and friends. When Gannon's mother, Landon, steps up to give her statement, she first addresses her son.
"I miss you, Gannon, and I love you to the moon and back again. Our first biggest blessing came into the world, weighing only 1 pound and 6 ounces. You fought all the odds and developed a personality and a smile that's larger than life. You became my hero that day. You forever changed my heart and my life, and that will never change. And unfortunately, you left this world fighting."
Then she gives her statement about Letecia, the woman who brutally murdered her son.
"For more than 3 agonizing years, I've often wondered what I may say. No parent should have to see or hear the horrific things she has done. She destroyed dozens of lives of people who never wanted to believe that she could have done this. Mother to mother, I trusted her with my children. She knew how special Gannon was, and it's so sad to sit here today and face her, a person even Gannon loved, one that I know while she was attacking and killing him and fought for his life, he defended himself against her, still loving her. I've sat here for over a month having to listen to her sick lies, even as she tried to destroy who I was in Albert as a father. I've had to sit and listen and watch every reenactment of images. No one wants left in their mind. You wanted to leave us with that, knowing it would torture us. But you underestimated me. I am Landon. Gannon's mom, and that will never change. Through my hurt, anger, and pain, I will never be the monster that she is. Justice has been served today.
Gannon's father, Al, also addressed the court.
Throughout these past 3 years since Gannon was beaten and drugged, carved up, shot at point-blank range, and discarded like yesterday's garbage, I've encountered many people that would figuratively do the same to me. When I met Tisha, she was beautiful, extremely intelligent, as many have testified to, and a seemingly successful woman. A far cry from the nappy-headed, murderous, narcissistic, and arrogantly flippant human being that sits in our midst today. I asked to be stripped of my last name immediately. It's nauseating and infuriating to hear her called Miss Stauch this past 3 years. I also pray that every night before she falls asleep, her last breath before she drifts off sounds just like the breath that she describes Gannon breathing as life left his body. And that all through her sleep, she dreams of all the fun they had at Disney and other places we went throughout our time together. And that every morning as she is about to wake, the end of her dream, the last words Gannon spoke or screamed or cried, "Tisha, stop! You're hurting me. Why, Tisha? Daddy, help me. I want my mommy. Why couldn't you let her just be a mama's boy? That's all he wanted to be. He just loved his mama. I wish she would tell me what those words were so I would know." And then as she speaks those words, the sound of a gunshot goes off and she wakes. Every day and night I pray she relives just those moments and then wakes up to a nice, warm, and kosher breakfast.
The kosher breakfast thing is something that some people questioned, but Letecia had filed a federal lawsuit claiming that her rights had been violated during her time in the El Paso County Jail. She handwrote a letter, sent it to the court, saying that her First and Eighth Amendment rights were violated, partly because she had not been given kosher food and the jail had not given her medical care. Finally, Al addressed Gannon.
Now for my precious, premature firstborn son, Gannon. I never in my wildest dreams would have ever thought you'd be in danger, buddy, or I know I wouldn't have not left you. At home with what turned out to be your murderer and the last person to ever see you on this earth. I'm so sorry.
The judge took a brief recess and came back to sentence Letecia that afternoon.
A parent's worst nightmare is getting a phone call letting them know that something has happened to their child. Ms. Stauch, you betrayed the person you loved enough to marry. You told your husband lies and took away someone he loved. You took away every day that Mr. Stauch or Ms. Bullard could have had with their son. You betrayed your daughter, Harley Hunt. I cannot imagine the emotional impact that you have had on her due to your selfish and calculated actions.
The judge also brings up Lena.
At some point, you even claimed this 8-year-old girl helped you move her brother's body from the basement to the back of your car. That's just simply not true. As she gets older, Lena is going to want to know more, and she's going to want to know if there was something that she could have done to prevent this.
And he brings up Gannon.
I can't imagine the terror and confusion that he must have felt in the last moments of his life when he knew his life was being taken by someone he trusted to protect it. You knew what you were doing. You made a number of clear and conscious decisions to cover or disguise what you had done. You have shown no remorse. throughout this process. I'm also reminded of the look you had on your face when you slipped your handcuffs while being transported back to Colorado and attacked Deputy James. I shudder to think that that was probably the last thing that Gannon saw before he died. I have handled hundreds, if not thousands, of criminal cases over the years. I can, however, say without hesitation that the facts in this case are the most horrific I have ever seen. Your conduct in this case deserves the maximum punishment that I can impose under Colorado law. As such, with respect to the charge of first-degree murder after deliberation, I remand you to the custody of the Colorado Department of Corrections for the remainder of your life with no possibility of parole.
Letecia will spend the rest of her life in prison. Harley has worked on forgiving her mother, and they do speak when Letecia is able to. Letecia attempted to escape jail and, of course, had charges added on, and she has since been moved from Colorado to a facility in Kansas. I went through more than 1,000 pages of the police file on Letecia, and it's incredible how thorough they were, following every lead in an attempt to find Gannon. There's a lot that didn't come out at trial, too, like some of the unhinged behavior of Letecia after the murders. She would contact the admins of Facebook groups that centered around finding Gannon. She would engage in social media conversations in the posts about finding Gannon where she would use obscenities toward the people commenting. She pretended her Facebook account got hacked and then claimed someone with the phone company found out that Gannon had been taken to Mexico. She also tried to plant other stories, like trying to make people think that Al wasn't Gannon's biological father, and that his biological father was in the area at the time of the disappearance, and that's probably who took him. She created countless fake profiles with different names, trying to spread misinformation and point the blame toward anyone else. Letecia also tried in many other ways to make herself a victim, often using some kind of medical emergency. For example, she faked a miscarriage when she was arrested. Then she faked COVID. A former boyfriend of Letecia's that she dated before Al also contacted the police, letting them know that there was a time when Letecia once snuck up on him and attacked him from behind, putting him into a chokehold and biting him on the back. He also said that Letecia was charged for the incident, but he didn't know the outcome of the case. He said one day, long after they had broken up, a police officer arrested him at his home for assault. The officer told him it was because he had assaulted Letecia earlier that day, but the man said he hadn't had any contact with Letecia for about 9 months. The case was dismissed. There are still unanswered questions, and there probably always will be. There are some theories that float around, but details vary from person to person. I can't help but think Letecia planned on killing Gannon while they were out that day. I think she thought that doing it while Al was out of town, Lena was at school, and Harley was at work would maybe be the easiest way. I think she left the phone at home on purpose and then stopped at Petco to leave Gannon's phone so it couldn't track her, which is also why she took Al's truck, knowing that his doesn't have GPS in the infotainment center, but her car does. I think she left the phone at Petco, drove to the S-curve, thinking maybe she would do it there. Or maybe she was just scoping it out in case she planned on taking his body there later. She had on a blue jacket when she went into Petco the first time, but she didn't have it on the second time. And Gannon got into the truck on the driver's rear side when they left the house, but he didn't get out of that side when they got back home, and I've always wondered about that. There's so many things that we will never know, but one thing for sure that we do know is that Gannon's short life had a huge impact on so many people. He was a hero to his mother, a gift to his father, and Al says that his son is leaving a legacy of unity and togetherness. At the sentencing, this video was played of Gannon. We can hear the happy, healthy, loving child that touched the lives of so many people, singing happily along with his mom.
Once I was 7 years old, my mama told me, go make yourself some friends or you'll be lonely. Once I was 7 years old. Do 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 do.
My name is Brandy Churchwell, creator of 13th Juror Podcast. If you're enjoying it, please leave us a review on Apple Podcast and Spotify. And share this episode with your friends. It's the best way to spread the word about these cases and helps others find us. For more information, photos, and episode guides, visit our website at 13thjurorpodcast.com.